Hey everybody, today let's learn how to make a game character in Unity of a cartoon tank that can fire, move left and right, shoot, and move the turret. Okay, so the first thing that we want to do is we want to go to the Unity asset store and download this asset, which has some really good looking cartoon tanks in it. I'm going to leave a link to it in the description, but what we want to do is we want to log into the Unity asset store and then hit this add to my assets button. This is going to be really important for loading the model into our scene and getting started. Awesome. So once we have it installed, we can come back to our Unity hub and let's go ahead and start a new project. So let's hit new project and we'll call this tank demo. We want it to be part of the 3D core. We do not want to use the universal render pipeline. We just want to use the core pipeline, the core template to start. So go ahead and hit create project. And we're going to give that just 1 second to load for us and get going. Okay, so the first thing that we want to do is we want to go ahead and add a plane to our scene. So let's go ahead and right click in our hierarchy and scroll down and go over to plane. Okay, awesome. So this just loads a regular white plane. We can see our camera up here and our light source. So let's go ahead and let's make our plane just a bit bigger. I think that's probably right about there. I think that's a good amount. And then the next thing that we want to do is we want to add our tank to the scene. So go up here, go to Window, scroll down to Package Manager, and then it should open something like this. And we want to go to, we want to select Packages and then My Assets. So it's going to take 1 second to fetch assets. And if you don't see anything like this, make sure you're logged into Unity. And I have a bunch of assets here, but the one that we want for this project is the one that we added from the Unity asset store earlier in the tutorial. So let's go ahead and find Cartoon Tank Free. And we're going to hit import. And we're going to hit download or re-download if you already have it installed. And then we're going to hit import. It's going to ask us which assets we want to import. And for the sake of this tutorial, let's just import all of the assets. Awesome. So we can see over here, it added it to our project folder. So it's inside of our assets and then it's in its own project folder. We want to open up the folder called CTF Prefab. And inside this folder, once it loads, should be a bunch of different prefabs that we can use to make this to make our game. But the prefab that we want to focus on for making a tank controller is the tank prefab. It doesn't matter what color you select, but I'm a fan of blue, so we'll go ahead and add this blue tank. It's okay if it's clipped into the plane. Totally cool for now. We'll worry about that in a second. Awesome. So once you've added your tank, let's go back to our scene view, and we want to do a couple things. The first thing we want to do is we want to add a box collider to our tank. So let's go ahead and move our plane down just a bit so we can see all of our tank, and then go ahead and select your tank that you've created. Now, what we need to do is we need to add a box collider. What is a box collider? Well, a box collider allows our object to interact and collide with other game objects in the scene. So go ahead and go over to your inspector and hit add component. We want to find box collider. So go ahead and search. And here's our box collider. As you can see, there's a green box, and this is the area of our box collider. So go down over here to size, and let's go ahead and increase the Y a little bit. And let's move it up a tad. And really just play with it until you get it right. But I think that's probably about good. It doesn't need to be perfect, but we want to get it really close to our wheels. like so. All right, so yeah, that looks pretty good. Let's check our front view. Yeah, it looks great. Awesome. So now our tank can collide with other things like our plane. The next thing we want our tank to be able to do is we want to give it the ability to interact with physics. So what we need to do is we need to add another component. We're going to call it rigid, and we're going to search for rigid body. So rigid body is basically, it says, hey, this thing has physics, it has mass, it has drag, it has gravity pulling on it, all these different things. But one thing that we want to change is we want to come down to collision detection, and we want to change it to continuous dynamic. Now, what that option does is it says, it basically, for every frame, it's going to make sure that we're not colliding with anything. Awesome. So if we go ahead and hit the play button, we can see this all in action. Oh, and look, our tank drops to the floor and it rests on the plane. Perfect. After that, we want to go ahead and we want to add the ability to move our tank. So what we need to do is we need to write a little bit of C# code. So if we go over to our assets, you can see our cartoon tank package and our scenes, but we want to add another folder. So go to create, folder, and let's go ahead and select and create a folder called scripts. Perfect. Let's go ahead and open that folder by double clicking. And we're going to hit create, C# script, and let's call this script move tank. Now this next part requires a code editor. I strongly recommend downloading an editor called VS Code. I'll link to a download link below, but what a code editor does is it allows us to edit the code in Unity simply by just double clicking on our script. So I come over here and I double select. Okay, so once we have our move tank script open, let's go ahead and get started. So the first thing we want to do is we want to declare some properties of our move tank. So firstly, we want to define some sort of move speed. We want the visibility to be public, meaning it's able to be seen outside of the class. So we're going to use the keyword public. And the variable is going to be called move speed. So move speed. Let's set it to an initial value of 5.0, add our f since it's a float, and add our semicolon. The next thing we want to do is we want to add our rotation speed. Again, it's going to be a visibility public, meaning it's visible outside of the class, and it's also going to be a float. So let's call it rotation speed. Let's set it equal to 120.0 f. Add our semicolon. After that, we want to create arrays of game objects for our left and our right wheels respectively. So let's do public and the data type, so game object, and add a set of brackets to indicate that it's an array. After that, let's name it. So we'll call it left wheels. And after that, let's do the same thing for our right wheels. So public, game object, empty bracket, right wheels. Okay, we also, speaking of wheels, want to adjust our wheel rotation speed. So let's do public, float, wheel rotation speed. And we're going to set that to an initial value of 200.0 f. Okay, so now that we've declared some of our public properties, let's declare some of our private properties, meaning they're only available from within our class. Some things we want to do is we want to initialize a rigid body. So let's do private rigid body RB. So this is the visibility, this is the data type, and this is the name of the property. After that, we want to do a move input. So private float move input. And last but certainly not least, private float rotation input. Okay, so as you can see, we have our start and our update methods. These methods each have individual properties that make them unique to the Unity game engine. Start runs at the initialization of the game object that our script is attached to. Our update runs once every frame. We can also add another method which inherits from this mono behavior class called fixed update. So now that we have that, let's add some functionality within our start method. The first thing that we want to do is we want to get the rigid body component from our game object and set it equal to our private RB, which is a rigid body. So we can do RB equals get component then we want to use the less than rigid body and close that up. Add our semicolon to show that we're done. And that's all we need to do for our start method. Okay, in addition to the start, update, and fix update methods that inherit from the mono behavior, we can also declare our own methods. The first method that we want to introduce is the move tank object method. This method will return nothing, and we're going to call it move tank object, or OBJ. It's going to take a float, and that float is going to be called input. So now what do we want to do inside of our method? Well, we want to create a vector or a position or force in space. So we can do vector 3 move direction, and let's set it equal to the forward position times our input argument times our move speed times time dot fixed delta time. Time dot fixed delta time helps our game object move at the same rate of speed regardless of the frame rate in our update method. Next, we want to set our rigid body to this new position. So what we can do is we can call our RB dot, and we can call the move position method. That move position method needs to take the position that was previous, so RB dot position, and we need to add our vector 3. Add a semicolon, and that's all we need to do in our move tank object method. In addition to moving our tank forward, left, right, and back, we also want to be able to rotate the tank. So let's create a method for that. Like the move tank object, it's going to return nothing, so void. And we're going to call it rotate tank. It's also going to take an input of type float. And let's add our brackets. Similar to the move tank object, let's create a new variable. So let's do float rotation is equal to our input times our rotation speed times time dot fixed delta time. Okay, after that, we want to create something called a quaternion. A quaternion is just a rotation vector. So we can do quaternion turn rotation is equal to quaternion dot Euler, and we can do 0.0f, then our rotation, and then 0.0f. And Euler takes all three dimensions, so the x, the y, and the z. Now the reason the x and the z are set to 0 is because the only ways that we want to move are left to right. So we only care about rotation in the y-axis. After that, we want to apply our new turn rotation to our rigid body. So we can do RB dot move rotation, and we're going to set that to RB dot rotation times our turn rotation. As always, don't forget your semicolon. And we're done with the rotate tank. The last method that we want to introduce to our tank controller object is the rotate wheels method. The rotate wheels method is responsible for rotating the wheels as the tank object moves. So again, it returns nothing. And we're going to call this method rotate wheels. It's going to take in two arguments, float. We're going to call it move input. It's also going to take in a rotation input of type float. Add our open and closing brackets. And next, we want to compute the wheel rotation. So very similar to rotate tank and move tank object, we can do float wheel rotation is equal to move input times our wheel rotation speed times time dot delta time. After that, let's move the left wheels. How might we do this, you ask? Well, we need to iterate through each game object in our game object array called left wheels, and then rotate it some amount. So let's write a for each statement, and each object in this array is a game object. And let's call it wheel, and we're iterating through left wheels. Open and close our brackets. Now, as long as wheel does not equal null, meaning a wheel exists at the index that we're at, we want to rotate that wheel. So let's do wheel dot transform dot rotate, open parentheses, the wheel rotation minus the rotation, minus the rotation input times the wheel rotation speed. We also want to multiply that times time dot delta time. Since we only want to rotate in the x direction, let's set the others to 0. So 0.0f, 0.0f. Add our semicolon to close it up. And we're all set. Now, we've done this for the left wheels. We should also do them for the right wheels. So let's copy this for each loop. Control C. And let's just paste it down here. Fix any formatting errors. And let's change the variable left wheels to right wheels. Instead of subtracting, let's go ahead and add the rotation input. This is because when we're rotating, we want the wheels to move opposite of each other. So the next thing we want to do is we want to get input from our keyboard. So let's go up to our update method, and let's get the vertical and horizontal axes. Move input is equal to input.get axis, and let's call the vertical axis. This vertical axis is directly tied to your W and S keys. This vertical axis is directly tied to our W and S keys. It's because Unity supports a variety of game consoles. Now, let's tie our rotation input, and let's set it equal to input.get axis, and let's just get the horizontal axis. Add our semicolon. Then at the end of our update method, let's call rotate wheels. So rotate wheels, and let's put in our move input and our rotation input. And last but not certainly least, we want to add our methods to our fixed update. So let's add our move tank object, and let's input our move input. Close it up with a semicolon. Lastly, let's call our rotate tank method. So rotate tank rotation input. Make sure to add the semicolon to both, and we're done with the script. Go ahead and check your code for any errors and make sure you got it exactly as listed. After that, hit Control S and exit out. Okay, you can see our move tank script is still in our scripts folder. So what we can do is we can drag our script down into our inspector. Here you can see now the move tank script is listed as a component of our tank free blue. The next thing we want to do is we want to add our wheels. So go ahead and hit the plus button twice, and let's add our left wheels. So drag and drop, and do it again. Drag and drop. Okay, so now we have our left wheels added. Let's go ahead and add our right wheels. So double click the plus and add your first right wheel and your second right wheel. Now, if we go back to our scene and hit the play button, our tank should now move. So now if you notice, the wheels are a bit too slow for the tank. So we can go over to our rotation speed, our move speed, and our wheel rotation speed and adjust them as necessary. For this tank, I'm going to increase the wheel rotation speed. Play it again. And that's looking a bit better. The next thing we want to do is really simple and really easy. We want to be able to rotate and adjust this top turret. So like before, create C# script, and let's call this spin. Go ahead and double click to open. So now that we have it open, let's just get started with a basic public property. We're going to call this spin speed. We're going to set it to 90.0. Don't forget your F and your semicolon. And let's get rid of our start method because we don't need it. And on our update method, we want to listen for the values Q and E. So if input dot get key is key code dot Q, Then we want to transform dot rotate our game object, and we want to do it in the up direction. So vector 3 dot up, and we want the value to be the spin speed times time dot delta time. Don't forget your semicolon. And let's go ahead and copy line 11 through 13. Paste. And it appears that I've made an error, so let's get rid of the capital E's. And also we want to replace the Q with the E, and we want our spin speed to be negative. Simple and easy. Hit Control S and exit out of your editor. Awesome. So now what we can do is we can grab our tank-free tower and we can add our spin component. So simply drag your spin component down to the inspector and you should see it appear below. Let's go ahead and hit the play button. And now if you use your Q and E keys, it should rotate that top turret backwards and forwards, left and right. All right, for the last part of this video, we're going to create a bullet handler, which will allow our tank to be able to shoot bullets. So like we've been doing, hit create, C# script. We're going to call this bullet handler. Let me adjust my spelling there. And then we're going to double click to open. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is we want to create a new method, and we're going to call it spawn object. The spawn object is going to spawn our bullet and give it some amount of force. So void spawn object, close parentheses, open up your brackets. So vector 3 spawn position is going to be equal to transform dot position. This is going to create a new vector 3 at the position of our game object. We also want to create a spawn rotation. So quaternion spawn rotation is equal to quaternion dot identity. Add our semicolon. So the next thing that we want to do is we want to create a local X direction. This local X direction is going to be the direction in which our bullet fires. So let's create, again, another vector 3, and let's call it local X direction. Set it equal to transform dot transform direction, and we're going to set it equal to vector 3 dot forward. In addition to creating our local X direction, we also want to create some sort of velocity. So let's do vector 3 velocity is equal to local X direction times, let's say 75 for now, times some public property that we're going to create up here. So we'll say public float launch speed is equal to 75.0f. So next we're going to set our local X direction times our launch speed. Add our semicolon. And now we want to instantiate our object. In this case, our object is going to be our bullet. So game object, or new object is equal to instantiate our object prefab which is going to be at our spawn position and our spawn rotation. And then we want to get the rigid body component and apply the velocity that we created on line 24. So rigid body RB is equal to new object dot get component, and the component that we want to get is the rigid body. Lastly, we want to take our rigid body and apply the force. So rigid body dot velocity is equal to velocity. Next, we want to instantiate this object prefab that we created down here. So let's go up here, public game object prefab. This is going to allow us to drag and drop our bullet. Okay, so lastly, we want to listen for the spacebar, and on that spacebar, we want to spawn this bullet and give it that velocity that we did in our method spawn object. So, like we've been doing, if input dot get key down, and we want to listen for our spacebar. If that spacebar is held down, we want to do spawn object. Hit Control S. And for now, let's just leave our start method blank. Also, when we created the script, we misspelt it. So we got to double check our spelling here. Make sure the name of the class always matches the name of the file. Hit Control S, and we're done. Now that we're back in our editor, we need to create an empty game object that we can attach this script to. So go over to tank free tower, right click, create empty. We'll call this bullet spawn. And let's adjust the location of the spawn. So grab with the move tool, and let's move our empty game object to the end of the barrel. Looks good to me. So now let's add our script. Let's go over, open our scripts folder, select bullet spawn, and we're going to drag our bullet handler into the inspector. The next thing we need to do is we need to create our bullet prefab. So go over to your hierarchy, right click, and create a sphere. Move your sphere near your tank so we can get a good idea of how large it actually is. And let's go ahead and scale it down using the scale tool. Looks about right. And let's rename our sphere to something more fitting, like bullet. Go back to your assets folder, drag bullet into your assets, and delete it from your hierarchy. Go to your bullet spawn, drag and drop the bullet. And now if we hit play, a bullet spawns. However, we want the bullet to actually move. So how do we make the bullet actually move? Exit out from your play, go to your bullet prefab, and hit add component. We want to add a rigid body, and you can adjust the mass, drag, angular drag, etc. to your liking. I'm going to keep it as the default, but now that it's a rigid body, it should move in space. Hit the play button, hit the space bar, and there the bullet goes. We can also rotate our turret, and it'll fire in that direction. So to give a quick demo, we can go backwards, forwards. We can rotate left and right. We can rotate our turret with our Q and E keys, and we can also fire with our spacebar. The last thing I want to do is I want to edit the position of our camera. So hit the move tool on your camera, go up, and let's rotate down a bit. So we have the whole scene in view. I also want to expand the size using the scale tool of our plane. We can hit play maximized and then come up here, hit the play button. And now we have a view of our entire map and our tank. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you got something out of this tutorial, and feel free to hit the subscribe button if you enjoyed this content. Thank you so much.